2nd June 1942 unfolded over the battered defensive lines outside Sevastopol, where Soviet command relied heavily on its sniper corps to compensate for destroyed observation posts and failing communication lines. Among the deployed units were female snipers trained through specialized Soviet programs that emphasized precision fire, camouflage endurance, and adaptive battlefield tactics. Archival training data shows that women selected for sniper duty often delivered above-average hit consistency and maintained concealment discipline longer than mixed detachments, making them essential assets in sectors suffering constant pressure. One of these women was positioned in a fractured trench overlooking a ravine used repeatedly by German infantry to test the defensive perimeter. Her assignment, recorded in sector combat logs, centered on counter-sniper suppression and the targeting of enemy observers directing heavy weapons fire. German reports from the same day confirmed that their forward elements depended on a concealed marksman supporting an artillery spotter, whose role was to correct fire onto Soviet machine gun nests dominating the approach. As the morning barrage subsided, German movement increased. Dust clouds briefly cleared, exposing Soviet positions to improved visibility. This shift threatened the entire sector. Once the German spotter achieved uninterrupted observation, the machine gun crews anchoring the defense would be rapidly neutralized. The female sniper's role therefore shifted from routine interdiction to urgent disruption of the enemy's spotting cycle. Noting repeated German attempts to trigger return fire, she employed a deceptive tactic rarely documented but included in advanced sniper training modules: the creation of a false target silhouette. Using a damaged helmet retrieved from a collapsed firing step, she attached it to a length of field wire tensioned through broken sandbags. The intention was to mimic an undisciplined rise above cover, knowing the German sniper had already demonstrated a pattern of precision shots at minimal exposure. The technique required timing that left no margin for error. According to the written after-action summary, she waited until the artillery smoke thinned enough for a clear silhouette, then raised the decoy a few centimeters above the trench lip. The response came instantly. A single shot struck the helmet, revealing the exact point of origin through a visible muzzle flash reflected off exposed rock. The entire sequence, from preparation to shot detection, lasted roughly 90 seconds. The muzzle flash exposed by the shot created an opportunity that the sector had been unable to achieve through hours of conventional counterfire. The female sniper shifted position immediately, using a pre-dug lateral niche recorded in field engineering notes as part of a standard redundancy plan. From this angle, she gained a partial view of the German hide previously identified only by pattern, not by coordinates. Her follow-up shot, documented in the sector's combat ledger, struck before the enemy sniper relocated, eliminating the marksman who had been systematically disrupting Soviet observation teams since dawn. This action produced effects that extended far beyond the neutralization of a single threat. German infantry, advancing along the ravine, depended heavily on that hidden sniper to suppress Soviet watchers long enough for assault groups to cross exposed ground. With the marksman removed, the spotter supporting him lost essential cover and withdrew deeper behind broken limestone, interrupting the correction cycle for mortar and infantry gun units. German unit summaries captured after the war describe a sudden, blind interval during which several fire missions were canceled or launched with inadequate accuracy. The defender's female sniper exploited this break by relaying visual signals, colored cloth markers placed on trench edges, to mortar sections that had been waiting for confirmation of enemy fallback points. Without functioning radios, these simple indicators formed the backbone of the sector's communication network. Observers recorded that within minutes of the decoy maneuver's success, mortar bursts landed along the very path German infantry had used minutes earlier, forcing them to retreat towards secondary staging positions. This withdrawal allowed Soviet machine gun teams to reposition ammunition, a crucial adjustment noted in the logistics entry for the day. Before the disruption, several teams were within minutes of exhausting their remaining belts. Relief was impossible under continuous German observation. Only the brief collapse in enemy visibility created by the sniper's action allowed runners to complete the resupply run. The influence of the 90-second trick therefore can be traced through multiple operational layers: the removal of a key enemy shooter, the breakdown of coordinated spotting, the restoration of Soviet fire control, and the stabilization of a failing defensive line. Sector Command later assessed that without this sequence, the ravine would likely have fallen under German control before noon. After the German withdrawal from the ravine's forward edge, the defenders regained several minutes of relative stability. Reports from the sector emphasized that this interval was not calm, but simply less lethal, allowing the female sniper to reassess the field. Her role expanded from a single counter-sniper engagement to continuous battlefield regulation, a function Soviet doctrine increasingly relied on when centralized command systems broke down under bombardment. Snipers, particularly women trained in dual reconnaissance roles, were expected to operate as decentralized sensors. Archival manuals note that they were instructed to track movement rhythms, map likely infiltration paths, and identify structural weaknesses in enemy formations. The female sniper applied this framework immediately. Using the improved visibility created by the disrupted German spotting cycle, she began marking new enemy assembly points forming behind a cluster of shattered boulders on the far slope. These markings guided mortar adjustments with notable precision. Combat records show that German infantry attempting to regroup were repeatedly forced to reposition due to well-timed indirect fire. None of these strikes were heavy enough to break formations, but each disrupted alignment long enough to delay their next coordinated push. German diaries recovered after the war described the hour following the sniper's decoy action as fragmented and uneven, with units unsure whether the Soviets had brought in new artillery or simply improved their observation. Meanwhile, the Soviet trench network required constant modification. The earlier bombardment had collapsed firing steps and exposed overhead cover, making fixed positions untenable. The snipers' continued monitoring allowed engineers and riflemen to work in brief intervals between German probes. According to engineering notes, they stabilized two critical trench corners and redug a communication groove that had been destroyed during the morning barrage. These repairs would not have been possible under uninterrupted enemy observation. The German command, recognizing that the ravine's advance had stalled, attempted to compensate by shifting machine gun detachments onto elevated terrain. However, these placements lacked the subtle concealment the eliminated sniper had provided earlier. The female sniper identified their reflective metal components, gun shields and tripod joints, catching glints of light through drifting smoke. Her reports contributed to a pattern of suppressive fire that forced the German crews to lower their weapons or relocate, further slowing the reorganization effort. Thus, the initial 90-second deception triggered operational consequences that continued to expand, influencing both sides' ability to adapt to rapidly shifting battlefield conditions. By midday on the 2nd of June 1942, the battlefield had shifted from fluid assaults to a tense contest of observation. The German command attempted to reassert control by bringing forward light infantry guns intended to neutralize the Soviet snipers who had disrupted their advance. However, terrain conditions along the ravine compromised their effectiveness. Recoil dislodged loose limestone, revealing gun positions and limiting their firing angles. German operational notes describe repeated repositioning attempts that yielded minimal improvement. The female sniper used these exposure patterns to refine her mapping of enemy fields of fire. Soviet doctrine emphasized that snipers should not only eliminate targets, but also identify structural vulnerabilities in enemy deployment. Her sketches, later incorporated into the sector's tactical records, outlined gun crew routines, ammunition staging points, and predictable pauses caused by terrain instability. This information allowed Soviet machine gun teams to adjust firing arcs more efficiently, conserving limited ammunition while maintaining defensive pressure. Meanwhile, the German infantry struggled to coordinate under deteriorating visibility. Smoke from both sides' shells settled unevenly across the ravine, obscuring paths and forcing assault groups into narrow approach roads. The female sniper monitored these bottlenecks, timing her shots to disrupt concentration rather than maximize individual kills. Sector calculations estimate that her targeted fire delayed multiple German pushes by forcing repeated cover-seeking behavior at critical moments indirectly. This created windows for essential trench maintenance. Soviet engineers documented several rapid repairs performed under the sniper's protective influence: reinforcement of a communication trench, excavation of an alternate firing niche, and stabilization of a collapsing parapet. These interventions were only possible because her fire intermittently suppressed German observers who would otherwise have directed immediate countermeasures. German frustration became evident in their tactical adjustments. Machine gun crews attempted to mask reflections by covering metal components with cloth, while rifle squads experimented with staggered advances to draw fire. Yet these measures could not compensate for the absence of the eliminated German sniper, who had previously anchored their visibility. Without his precision, German units hesitated before crossing open areas, providing the defenders with crucial breathing room. Through steady observation and measured fire, the female sniper extended the influence of her earlier 90-second deception far beyond its initial success. She transformed a brief tactical opening into a sustained operational advantage, shaping the tempo of combat across the entire ravine. As the afternoon progressed, German units attempted to recover momentum by concentrating assault groups along the ravine's northern lip. Their objective, outlined in captured planning documents, was to overwhelm Soviet fire with a rapid push supported by mortars placed behind a shallow ridge. The success of this maneuver depended on timing. The infantry had to advance before Soviet snipers could locate and disrupt the mortar crews. The female sniper's continued surveillance made this timing increasingly difficult. Her vantage point, reinforced earlier through improvised engineering work, provided intermittent but valuable visibility gaps through drifting smoke. She tracked the movement patterns of German runners, delivering fire adjustments, identifying the intervals between their relays. These intervals revealed the approximate location of the mortar teams, even when the crews themselves remained concealed. The information was passed through prearranged visual signals to Soviet mortar sections, which launched probing fire toward suspected coordinates. Records from the sector indicate that even near misses forced the German mortars to halt firing temporarily, disrupting the synchronized push they were preparing. Each pause cascading through the formation widened the gap between supporting bombardment and infantry readiness. German unit notes later referred to this period as a series of aborted starts, highlighting how the defenders' observation accuracy created uncertainty about when to initiate the assault. During this disruption, the female snipers shifted focus toward German attempts to establish supplementary firing platforms closer to the ravine floor. These platforms were intended to provide covering fire for the stalled infantry groups. However, assembling them required exposing equipment, particularly metal fasteners and tripod components. The sniper targeted these exposures selectively, aiming not at crews but at equipment points that would force delays in setup. Sector logs describe several instances where German machine gun teams were compelled to relocate due to compromised firing positions. The result was a compounding of delays across German efforts. With support weapons slowed, infantry units hesitated, and the mortar teams, previously the backbone of their offensive rhythm, remained cautious under sporadic but precise Soviet counterfire. Meanwhile, Soviet defenders used the extended pause to redistribute ammunition along the trench network and rotate fatigued riflemen away from overstressed firing points. These rotations, noted in personnel records, strengthened the overall resilience of the sector. Thus, the influence of the female sniper extended from a single decisive moment to a systemic obstruction of enemy coordination. By controlling visibility, disrupting support elements, and forcing fractional delays, she shaped the conditions under which the next phase of combat would unfold. By late afternoon on the 2nd of June 1942, the defensive sector relied increasingly on sniper-generated information rather than centralized command artillery vibration, collapsed communication lines, and constant smoke prevented officers from maintaining a continuous operational picture. In this vacuum, the female sniper's observations became a primary source of battlefield awareness. Her sector reports, conveyed through visual signals and runner relays, guided decisions on ammunition distribution, firing arc adjustments, and the positioning of reserve rifle groups. One of her key contributions during this period involved identifying a pattern in German movement along the upper ridge. She noted that small assault elements repeatedly probed the same narrow path just before each mortar adjustment cycle. This pattern suggested an attempt to identify a weak spot for a concentrated breakthrough. The sniper's detection of this rhythm allowed Soviet defenders to reinforce a trench corner that had previously been considered secondary combat records. Later showed that this reinforced point became the exact location of a major German push at dusk, a push that might have succeeded had it struck the trench before the reinforcement. Her influence expanded further when she detected the shifting of German medical teams behind a rock outcrop. Although not a direct tactical target, their relocation indicated increased casualties among the forward elements, a sign that the German command was preparing to escalate pressure rather than withdraw. This interpretation aligned with Soviet expectations, but provided crucial confirmation that enabled the defenders to conserve ammunition for a larger assault rather than expend it on smaller probes. Meanwhile, German forces attempted to restore observation capacity by sending additional sharpshooters to the slope where the earlier sniper had been eliminated. However, these replacements lacked the established concealment techniques of their predecessor. The female sniper observed slight inconsistencies in shadow patterns caused by disturbed dust and incorrect positioning relative to the sun's angle. These minute details, noted in sector after-action analysis, enabled her to preemptively target two new hides before they could influence the battlefield. Each eliminated or suppressed observer compounded German difficulties. Without a stable observation chain, their artillery and mortar units struggled to correct fire. Shells increasingly landed behind Soviet lines or scattered across barren slopes, wasting limited ammunition. German documents from the day describe uncertainty in fire missions and hesitation to commit additional resources without clear viewing conditions. Through persistent observation and selective fire, the female sniper continued shaping the operational environment, ensuring that when the next major German assault came, it would do so with diminished coordination and reduced effectiveness. As evening shadows stretched across the ravine on the 2nd of June 1942, German forces initiated a broader attempt to regain visual dominance. They deployed smoke rounds to obscure Soviet firing lines, while simultaneously pushing assault groups toward the lower slope. The maneuver aimed to overwhelm defenders through layered pressure, counting on reduced visibility to neutralize the precision of Soviet snipers. Yet the female sniper adapted quickly to the altered conditions. Her field notes, later incorporated into the sector's summary, describe how she tracked movement not through outlines, but through deviations in smoke density, compressed footprints, displaced gravel, and the slight darkening of drifting smoke revealed the direction and speed of advancing German elements. This skill, emphasized in Soviet sniper training, allowed her to maintain awareness even when traditional lines of sight were disrupted. Using this method, she identified the leading edge of the German assault earlier than observers relying solely on direct visual contact. This early detection allowed Soviet machine gun teams to prepare ambush fire at pre-measured angles rather than wait until the enemy fully emerged from the smoke. Their initial burst forced the German assault groups to scatter, collapsing the cohesion needed for a decisive breakthrough. German reports from the sector later acknowledged that the assault lost formation before reaching intended staging points. The female sniper then focused on a more subtle threat: German engineers attempting to establish a covered fire lane by clearing debris along a narrow ledge. If completed, this lane would have enabled flank fire onto the Soviet trenches. She monitored their progress through intermittent smoke gaps, targeting only the most critical laborers, specifically those handling cutting tools and marker stakes. Field logs attribute multiple delays in the construction of this fire lane directly to her selective shots, each forcing the engineers to retreat and regroup. The disruptions had cumulative effects. The incomplete fire lane left the German assault exposed from one side, enabling Soviet mortar crews to adjust fire without risking counterfire from a concealed flanking gun. The resulting barrage struck at the fragmented assault groups still trying to reorganize below the ridge. Several German units were forced to withdraw to their initial positions, abandoning equipment that had been intended for the next phase of the attack. Throughout these actions, the female sniper remained positioned within a damaged trench niche, where overhead cover had nearly collapsed earlier that day. Despite structural instability, she maintained steady observation, enabling Soviet units to respond in a controlled manner rather than panic under the sudden German surge. By controlling the timing and flow of information into the defensive network, she preserved the sector's ability to adapt under pressure. Her influence over the battlefield thus continued not through dramatic engagements, but through precise, informed interference that prevented the enemy from gaining the initiative. The German evening assault, intended to break the ravine's defense entirely, ended instead as another disrupted and fragmented attempt. As darkness began to settle over the ravine on the 2nd of June 1942, both sides faced mounting fatigue. German infantry units, stalled by repeated disruptions, attempted to shift tactics once more by deploying small infiltration groups. These groups relied on silence and low-profile movement, operating under the assumption that Soviet defenders, especially snipers, would struggle to track targets in diminishing light. Yet the female sniper had trained extensively in low-light detection, a discipline emphasized in Soviet sniper schools because dusk and dawn offered some of the best opportunities to counter enemy movement. Her observations during this phase focused on behavioral cues rather than visual clarity. Infiltration groups advancing under poor light often revealed themselves through subtle environmental disturbances: displaced grit sliding down a slope, a faint silhouette interrupting a continuous line of shadow, or inconsistent spacing between footfalls. She detected these patterns and relayed directional indicators to nearby riflemen using silent hand signals, preventing German units from approaching the trenches undetected. Sector records show that at least 2 German infiltration attempts were halted before reaching the wire obstacles. Instead of firefights, the defenses responded with timed bursts aimed at estimated approach angles. These responses forced the infiltrators to scatter, preserving Soviet ammunition while denying the enemy the element of surprise. Meanwhile, artillery remnants on the German side attempted blind harassment fire, hoping to dislodge Soviet snipers before full nightfall. Without observers, these fire missions were imprecise. Shells landed sporadically across the rear slopes or exploded harmlessly in already devastated sections of trench. The female sniper capitalized on the randomness by maintaining her position through each incoming burst, understanding that relocation would reduce her observational advantage and risk unnecessary exposure. Her continued stability under fire allowed Soviet defenders to carry out a final round of critical preparations before night, redistributing remaining ammunition, relocating wounded personnel, and clearing firing arcs obstructed by debris. These adjustments, noted in trench maintenance reports, significantly strengthened the sector's readiness for the expected nighttime assaults. At the same time, she monitored German efforts to establish nighttime signaling patterns. Flickers from concealed lamps and brief flashes along the ridge suggested attempts to coordinate movement without relying on vulnerable runners. The sniper recorded these flashes and deduced probable assembly points behind the ridge crest. This information guided Soviet mortar crews in preparing pre-registered fire zones for the coming hours. The cumulative effect of her actions, early detection, silent communication, stability under bombardment, and disruption of enemy signaling, created a defensive posture far stronger than the sector's material condition would suggest. Though operating alone within her trench niche, her influence radiated outward through every coordinated adjustment the defenders made. By the time full darkness settled, the German command faced a sector that had not weakened as expected, but had instead grown more structurally coherent, an outcome directly tied to the sustained precision and perception of the female sniper, whose 90-second deception had first shifted the battle's momentum. Full darkness on the 2nd of June 1942 brought a new phase of the battle in which visibility, discipline, and anticipation outweighed raw firepower. German forces, aware that daylight efforts had failed to break the ravine's defenses, prepared a final coordinated attempt relying on night infiltration, supported by intermittent mortar fire. Their assumption was that Soviet snipers, particularly the female sniper, who had disrupted their operations throughout the day, would lose much of their advantage in near total darkness. Yet this assumption underestimated the methods she employed. Low-light doctrine in Soviet sniper training emphasized the use of auditory triangulation and pattern recognition over visual confirmation. The female sniper applied these principles precisely. She identified German staging activity through rhythm rather than sight, the pacing of boots softened by cloth wrappings, the distinct clink of metal despite attempts at muffling, and the repeated use of specific approach angles already mapped earlier. Her attention to these cues allowed her to pinpoint clusters of enemy movement without revealing her position through unnecessary firing. Sector documents describe how she relayed these findings through a prearranged series of tapping signals along the trench floor. These signals guided Soviet riflemen to adjust their firing arcs silently, ensuring that any German breakthrough attempt would meet coordinated resistance rather than fragmented defensive fire. The defenders thereby prepared not for random skirmishes, but for a timed, cohesive response matching the enemy's movement rhythm. The Germans began their advance shortly after midnight. Their infiltration groups moved in staggered lines, aiming to bypass the machine gun nests that had blocked daytime assaults. However, their progression intersected with the zones the sniper had marked earlier. When the first group reached a narrow depression, Soviet riflemen opened controlled fire exactly where she had indicated, breaking the formation before it could expand into the trench line. German units attempting to reinforce the breach came under additional fire from angles adjusted hours earlier, based on her low-light observations. The German command attempted to salvage the situation by increasing mortar fire along the trench's approximate location. But without observational correction, these rounds landed chaotically. In contrast, Soviet mortar crews employed pre-registered patterns drawn from the sniper's earlier mapping of ridge movements. Their fire struck key congregation points behind the slope, halting German attempts to reorganize for a second push. Throughout the night, the sniper maintained her post despite shifting shadows and intermittent explosions. Her steady presence enabled the defenders to modulate their fire, conserving ammunition for decisive moments rather than wasting it on blind volleys. This fire discipline, noted in after-action reports, played a major role in preserving the sector until dawn. By preventing infiltration, directing counters at precise locations, and sustaining the defender's situational awareness, the female sniper shaped the night battle as decisively as she had shaped the events that began with her 90-second deception earlier that morning. The German effort, intended as a final opportunity to seize the ravine before sunrise, concluded instead as a series of fragmented attempts that failed to break the reinforced Soviet line. Dawn on the 3rd of June 1942 revealed the consequences of the previous day's struggle. German positions along the ravine showed signs of exhaustion. Abandoned equipment, stalled mortar sites, disrupted machine gun emplacements, and scattered traces of infiltration teams halted before reaching their objectives. Soviet records from the sector make clear that the defensive line had survived not through superior firepower, its ammunition reserves were critically low, but through the maintenance of information dominance, a dominance centered on the actions of the female sniper, whose 90-second deception had altered the battle's trajectory. Her initial trick, executed in a narrow window of thinning smoke early on June 2nd, removed a critical German sniper whose precision had guided artillery and shaped every German movement along the slope. The absence of that shooter destabilized the enemy's spotting cycle, forcing reliance on improvised observation methods that proved far less effective. Every subsequent German decision, assault timing, mortar coordination, infiltration attempts, repositioning of support weapons, occurred within a distorted operational picture, a distortion the female sniper continuously reinforced through her observations and selective fire defense summaries for the day. Highlights several key effects directly linked to her actions: delayed enemy assaults, failed synchronization between German infantry and support weapons, inability to maintain consistent observation, and repeated fragmentation of enemy groups at critical approach points. Each outcome compounded the next, producing a cumulative degradation in German cohesion while enabling Soviet units to preserve their remaining strength. Equally significant was the structural stability she provided. Her steady reporting allowed engineers to repair trench segments, permitted riflemen to rotate positions, and enabled mortar crews to target enemy assembly zones with limited ammunition. These adjustments created a defensive posture that endured hours of probing, bombardment, and infiltration attempts. Without the timely and accurate flow of information she supplied, the sector would likely have collapsed under the sustained pressure. When German forces reevaluated their assault plans on the morning of the 3rd of June, they interpreted the resilience of the Soviet line as evidence of reinforcement. In reality, the line had not grown stronger. It had merely avoided collapse through exceptional coordination built upon one sniper's precision, discipline, and situational awareness. German units shifted their focus to adjacent sectors, abandoning the ravine as a primary axis of advance for the day. This strategic redirection, noted in operational records, preserved the Soviet position for several more days of fighting. The influence of the 90-second deception extended far beyond the shot it provoked. It reshaped an entire day of combat by removing a key enemy observer, initiating a collapse of coordinated German assaults, and enabling the defenders to turn an overstretched, damaged position into a sustained barrier. Through training, adaptability, and meticulous observation, the female sniper demonstrated how an individual action, executed at the precise moment, could shift the momentum of a larger battle. Her actions on the 2nd of June 1942 became one of the clearest examples of how information, timing, and discipline could outweigh numerical and material disadvantage in the brutal, attritional fighting around Sevastopol. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more World War II stories.